Welcome to Unscripted Authentic Leadership, a podcast where we are seeking to lead change and to develop leaders to lead change and to mobilize the change that they desire to see, while also seeking to understand. I am your host, Lafayette Lane, joined by my co-host, John LeBron. We are here to bring you another episode, another week of Unscripted Authentic Leadership. How you doing, man?
I'm so good, man. It's been a great week, amazing, beautiful weekend. And I'm really excited to kick off this month's series. So,
absolutely. I feel the same way. It's been a great week, and I am excited and enthused for what is going to happen in this month of September. Before we get into the series and the topic today, we definitely want to just take time to say thank you to all listeners, all those who have been supporting our podcast, those who have subscribed to our YouTube channel, Unscripted Authentic Leadership. You'll see that right there on the bottom of your screen on YouTube, Unscripted Authentic Leadership. Go there and check us out. Hit the subscribe button, like and comment, and also share. We want to thank you to all those who have been streaming and following our podcast, whether that be by Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Buzzsprout, and other various podcast platforms. We say thank you for those that have been following us on our Instagram page at Unscripted Leadership, and then also following us on our Facebook page, Unscripted Authentic Leadership. We see the support, we see the reviews, we see the comments and the downloads, and for that, we say thank you. So we are excited, as we had mentioned a little bit at the top, to get into this series this month, our September series. John had brought this topic of diversity to my attention, and we talked about this, and I think that it is a pertinent and it is a important and relevant, timely topic that we need to discuss as leaders, and we want to educate, inform, and have an open dialogue. And so in this month of September, we're going to be talking about diversity. And I know that is a general term, so each week we will talk about a different aspect of diversity. Today's episode, we're going to deal with unconscious bias, the unconscious biases that we deal with when it comes to this term of diversity, unconscious bias. And so before we get into too deep to delve into what diversity means to us, and then also what unconscious bias is for those that may not know, you're probably wondering what in the world that is. I know that sounds like a fancy term, but I promise you it is very simple. And we all can definitely relate to it. And we all either have experienced it or we will experience it in our lives. Those of you that have tuned into this podcast, this is our 5th week. Clearly you can see that, they're talking about diversity. I see on the screen, you have one host who is Black or African-American, and you have one who is white or Caucasian. I consider John LeBron a brother of mine. And you've heard the term and the expression, brother from another mother, literally. And so I kind of want to share our story because I've had people come up to me. I even had someone come up to me today, and they said, man, I think it's a beautiful thing that you are doing a podcast that is displaying that diversity and inclusion and difference is possible, that we need to see that in 2020. And someone may say, well, that's sad that we're in the year of 2020, that, two sides, two different races, two different perspectives can't get along. But the reality is that this podcast, we're here to lead change and to understand. And so change and difference is welcome here. And I just kind of want to share our backstory of that. I met John a couple years ago now. We've been knowing each other. I was still in college, and I was doing an internship for my particular field of computer information science, and I needed to complete this internship to graduate. And so I met John. I went to interview the process, and John interviewed me. for his company that him and his dad own and work for, LeBron Management Solutions, and he can talk further on that. But interviewing that process, and it was like an interview like I've never had before. Now, I haven't had that many interviews, but while in this interview, it was as if we had known each other all of our lives. Honestly, I don't think we really talked much about the job or cybersecurity or things of that nature. It was more of life and our belief systems of that nature. And I think we just lost track of time, and we formed a friendship and a bond ever since. And so we wanted to come together to show the world that a Black man and a white man can come together and be friends, be brotherhood. We don't always see eye to eye on everything, and that's okay. But we allow our differences not to divide us, but to join us together and to build us and to sharpen us together. The Bible talks about iron sharpens iron. The only way that happens is they have to clash. And so we've had so many discussions off camera. The discussions that you guys see here week to week is why we started this podcast, because we saw things in our world that we did not like. We wanted to be that change. We were already having these discussions off camera. And so we felt that we were led by God and inspired to be purposed to lead this conversation and to lead this dialogue, that change is possible no matter what two sides of the track you come from, no matter what your background is. It is possible to lead change and have diversity, and you don't always have to agree. And so I know that was kind of lengthy, but I'm gonna allow my bro John to really just give his side of kind of the background of who we are, how we met, and just kick this diversity series off the right way. Go ahead, bro.
Yeah, so I still remember that day like it was yesterday. I had, what most people don't know is that my dad had started a firm a handful of years ago, and I was the first person to join them. And so, like anything else, you're looking for some quality to come and help your firm out, but also you want to be able to find someone you can help train and all that good stuff. And I remember calling the local community college and saying I'd love to find an intern. And they set up all the interviews for me. I had 11 that day. And I set them up for 45 minutes, which is kind of a lengthy interview, but I wanted to be able to understand each individual, how they think. Not do they think like me, but is it someone who can think for themselves, someone that is coachable, these things that I think are important, more than is this person technically sound, which is relatively important, but most are students and they're still learning. And so my very last interview at the end of the day, I was so tired. I've been talking for 10 interviews, 45 minutes apiece, and just exhausted, right? I don't talk that much during the day. And then here comes Lafayette Lane walking in. And, I didn't know. I saw the name on the resume, but I didn't know. Sometimes you see a name, you're like, oh, it's you. We're gonna talk about bias, right? And so you see a name and you can make an assumption about somebody. I didn't know if Lafayette was a French guy. I didn't know if it was, I didn't know anything. And I just remember him walking in, and I was so tired. And initially, you're kind of like, oh, is this last person gonna show up? Because I'm ready to go. And you're exhausted. And it was like a new presence came in the room. Right? He brings, if you ever met him, he brings a sense of life to the room. I'm not saying Lafayette's the loudest person in the room, but just some people bring a nice presence of, hey, it's a good day. And I remember thinking, as soon as he walked in, new life was just kind of brought into the room. I was exhausted. I do remember the look on your face when I told you were my 11th interview of the day. You're like, oh, man, this is not going to go well. And but we got talking, and he had mentioned something which happened to lead me to believe that he was a person of faith, and so I think I might have made a comment on that, but I don't typically lead with that in an interview. And then honestly, I just really enjoyed the conversation, and and so we selected. I didn't know we were going to be friends from that day. We selected Lafayette because we liked him. Or I liked him, based on, resume, but also I thought you would bring a great dynamic to the team. So fast forward, we don't still work together in the same company. He went off to bigger and better things and bigger companies and so forth. And we were excited for him to have those opportunities and all that kind of stuff. But while we were in the internship, sort of during breaks and different things like that, we would talk. And, everybody has a different conversation with different types of friends, right? Some friends we just shoot the breeze with. Some friends we talk about the old days. Lafayette and I never we're rarely just sort of talking about things that were not significant.
Right.
We usually talked about things of importance, and honestly, a lot of that started because we both were. It was evident we both liked to read and learn things, and so he would read reading books. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. I don't see a lot of people other than myself or someone I'm mentoring reading a self-help book. So we talk about that, and this wasn't the first day or month, but we only worked together for about 9-10 months,
Yeah.
and that would lead to these deeper conversations. And then, and like he said, we do not. People think that your friends have to agree with you 100%. We have the same heart and want the same results. We don't necessarily always think that the exact same steps should be taken to get to the same result. And a lot of that, in my opinion, I could be wrong, comes from the fact that we have different perspectives on life because of
Yeah.
how we've grown up and things that we've experienced. And so through our conversations, we've realized that, right? And I can still remember a conversation where we had, and it didn't go so well. And and I was like, hey, let's go get lunch. And so we went out to lunch, and I was like, hey, we good? And he's like, oh, it's not you. He's like, I'm just mad at the situation. It wasn't a work thing. It was something going on in the world. I don't even remember all the exact details, but kind of vaguely. And, and that's when I knew we were going to be, brothers for a long time, because it didn't matter if we didn't see things 100%. The mess that goes on in the world is not necessarily our fault, but we both want the same results. And so that's how we started this journey. And then fast forward a few years, here we are.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want those that are viewing this podcast, we're just using ourselves as templates for you to see. I hope you heard that last part of what John said, that we don't have the same perspective, but we have the same heart because we want to see the same result. And so often we get caught up on, if you don't do it the way that I think that you should do it, or you don't affiliate yourself with a particular political party, or you don't go to a particular denomination of a church that I go to, then it's not possible for you to choose or to get to that same desired result as me. When that is not the case at all. The reality is that my father used to say all the time, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And so it's all about having that heart and that mind, that what is our goal of the desired solution? What is the desired solution here? Not what is the difference? What is the solution? Because if you can find that you all have the same solution, no matter what differences you may have as a leader with the people that you are leading, or in a partnership or in an organization, I promise you, you can figure out a way to get the job done and to get the desired result that you want. And that's where that word diversity comes into play. I want to give a foundational definition of diversity before we get into the unconscious bias of diversity, because diversity is a really general term, and it can mean a variety of things to a variety of people. But when I think of diversity, and you look up the definition of diversity, I really want to get a scholastic definition so we really have a framework to work with. It is the condition of having or being composed of differing elements, to have a variety, to especially have the inclusion of different types of people, such as people of different races, different cultures, political backgrounds, in a group or in an organization. It means understanding, there's the key part, that each individual is unique, and recognizing our individual differences. One thing that sticks out in my mind in diversity that I really want to attack and I really want to break down is that different means wrong. Different does not mean wrong. Difference is needed. If all of us were the same, If two of us are the same, one of us is not needed. If we do not have difference in the world, if we don't have difference in our workplace, if we don't have differences in our organization, if we don't have differences in our community, we are no longer necessary, because we need that diversity to bring a different perspective. I promise you, not one person has it all. And so I may look at a situation, I may look at a problem, I may look at a particular thing that's going on from my perspective. But if you bring somebody in that has a different vantage point, a different perspective, I promise you that you can work to a better solution than you would by having a singular mindset of singularity, that I do not embrace difference. Now, we are not talking about something that's harmful, something that's sinful, something that's crazy, but we are just talking about the simple differences of life and people. What do you think about when you think about diversity, John, this whole definition of diversity? Kind of give us a simple foundation of what diversity means to you.
Well, first of all, my first bullet literally said in my head was, if everyone is exactly like you, then you simply are not needed. And that's exactly what you had said. So it's really funny how that worked out. You know, I had it in a note, and I was like, this needs to be the first thing I say, but apparently you beat me to it. But it's just...
My bad.
No, it's okay. I told Lafayette that note the other day, and no, I'm kidding. And so, no, but it's just true. You know, most people live in a dangerous zone, the comfort zone, right? And this zone consists of anything of familiarity.
Yeah.
Therefore, you know, we spend a lot of our time sort of demonizing anyone that does something different than how we would, behaves differently, you know, says things different, talks different, all those things, right? We like, oh, that's weird. Apparently that means it's the wrong way of doing things. You know, and since a lot of us behave based on our group of association, right? We all grow up in certain neighborhoods with certain groups of friends, and as you know, we typically start talking, walking, speak, like we kind of act similarly. Yes, we have our different personalities, but you'll find that you're often very similar to the people you spend most time with, right? Yeah, and so we have these groups of people who seem to see neighboring groups as odd or insufficient. Because if you think about it, we grow up in a group, so therefore we're similar to that group. Therefore, as we see other groups of people who act different, it's typically a group of people because they just grew up with family that did things different and friends that did things different. Yeah. And since we like things that are very familiar, right? We often seem to just assume that the way that somebody else does things is wrong, insufficient, bad, weird, whatever. And the reality is, our differences are what make us special, beautiful, and should be celebrated and really embraced.
Yes.
You know, I look at diversity as an opportunity, not as some compliance requirement at work, right? I understand why we have those things, but I don't think that I wish they weren't needed, because everybody looked for the opportunity to have people who did things and had experienced things differently as a bonus to their team, if that makes sense. I know we're not just talking about work, but we kind of are talking a lot about, you know, within the world. And so I look at it as an opportunity to add new perspectives based on, you know, whether somebody... Now, we're not just talking about, when we say diversity, this does not just have to mean, you know, based on our, you know, the skin color of each individual, right? Because we all have different shades, if we're being honest, right? I don't even like the term white and black. I had a good friend who said he went to Sherwin-Williams, and, you know, he would be classified as white. But when he went to Sherwin-Williams, he went to check out his actual tone, it was like okra or something like that, and he said it really depends on the season. And it was just his way of saying, like, why do we have to classify everybody as this or this, when the
Yeah.
reality is, if we all lined up, we could probably line people up from the lightest of tones to the darkest of tones, and there would be every tone in between practically, because we're just kind of a gradual, and difference, and who cares, right?
Yeah.
And so, anyways, not to get too far off, but when we talk about diversity, that can also mean, how we speak, where we grew up, how we see life. Some people grow up in other countries and see things very differently than we did. Some people grow up out in the country. Some people grow out in the city. Some people grow out, in
Yeah.
urban or suburbs, and all those things make a difference. Some people are older and younger. People assume that if you're younger, you don't understand the world. If you're older, and the opposite say, oh, if you're older, you're out of touch. I mean, it goes on and on.
Right.
When the reality when the reality is that every single point of every single one of those differences, and at every point in life, you add value based on your experience. It doesn't mean any of us know everything, right? But if we start learning to embrace the strengths and all of those differences, it could really be for a lot of good, not just for the world, but just simply in your company.
Absolutely. Embrace the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Embrace the difference. Embrace the difference. Your strength is found in your difference. That was powerful. That was powerful. And that's what we want to attack even further as we delve deeper into this topic of diversity. We want to talk about the unconscious bias. Unconscious bias. All unconscious bias means is it is an implicit bias. It is the underlying attitude and stereotypes that people unconsciously, you're not even aware of. This is just something that you normally do, that people unconsciously attribute to another person or a group of people that affect how they understand and engage with a person or group. So you're not even intentionally trying to hurt someone with your thought process. You're not trying to intentionally hurt this particular group of people or this person by some of the things that may come out of your mouth that may seem stereotypical. It's because, like you said, we've all been raised differently. And so a lot of these things we don't even know that we have in our minds until we say certain things. And someone may say, hey, man, that sounds a little off. And sometimes we are quick to pull the racist card, and unconscious bias is not racism. I want to dispel that. Racism is real. Racism is definitely real. It's a real thing that must be addressed. But I really think a lot of times it's misunderstanding because we are not aware and we don't educate. And so there are 12 types of unconscious bias that we want to cover today. And these biases can apply particularly in the workplace, but I don't want you to keep these biases constricted to the context of the workplace, because these biases cross all lines, whether it be in your workplace, in your community, inside of your home, in your church. And just like John said, not just racially, culturally, politically, how you see life. Because the reality is, if we can just change the way we think and the way that we perceive, it'll change what manifests and comes out of our mouth. Because whatever comes out of your mouth, it starts in your heart and it starts in your mind. And so we want to attack, and we want to, when I say attack, I mean address and educate these different biases. And let's put this disclaimer out there. We all have them, from Black to white to Latino to Republican to Democrat to conservative to Christian to Catholic to atheist. We all have biases. So we're all starting at a level playing field. This is not to attack anyone. This is not to make anyone feel bad, because I need this, John needs this, and we all need this. We all can be better. And the only way we can be better is that we seek to understand and to educate ourselves. And so let's get into these 12 types of unconscious biases. The first bias, the first unconscious bias, is called affinity bias. Affinity bias. Affinity bias is also known as similarity bias. Similarity bias. So that means that a tendency that people would have, that it's easier to connect with someone who has similar interests, experiences, and backgrounds as I do. And so my bias comes in when it comes to affinity bias is that if I go out for a particular interview at a particular company of Google, say for instance, this particular company is looking to hire me, they're looking for a culture fit. And so they are likely are going to fall into the bias of affinity because they are looking for someone who has similar interests, experience, or background. And so an example of that would be when a hiring team meets with someone they like and who they know will get along with the team. It's more often than not because that person shares similar interests, experience, and backgrounds, which is not helping your team grow and diversify. Similarity shouldn't automatically disqualify a candidate. They should not be the deciding factor either. And so, yes, we need similarities. Yes, it's easier to engage with someone from my own culture, from my neighborhood, from someone that has grown up in the same religious background as me. But the reality is that you make your similarity the deciding factor, you'll miss the difference that you need to strengthen your organization, to strengthen you as a leader. Because if all of us are the same, we will never grow. We'll never be stretched to the capacity that we need to be stretched in because all of us are similar. And the reality is that when you have similarity, you don't have someone that's in the organization, someone that's in your group that says, hey, this no longer works, because similarity breeds familiarity. And when you become familiar, we talked about it last week, you won't be able to change. It'll fall out of line with your purpose because you have an affinity to fall in love with who you are similar with and who you associate with. And so kind of talk about that affinity bias, John.
Yeah, so the problem with affinity bias, it's hard, in my opinion, to avoid. But it's important. The reason we talk about these things is because you might be unaware that it's a thing.
Yes.
And while we don't expect you, and we certainly won't be perfect at it, if you can recognize it 10% more, then that's just how much more you've improved, as a person.
Absolutely.
The problem with affinity bias is, we end up focusing on like strengths and qualities that match our own or our perspectives, right? And how can you grow as a person, as a team, as a family, if you haven't experienced or listened or invited people from other experiences into your circle, right?
Yes.
How, if you're a company, how do you expect to grow and beat challenges if the only viewpoint is of one view, and that's because everybody that you brought onto your team was just like you, right?
Yeah.
How do you expect to see new opportunities
Yeah.
if you've only brought people from one viewpoint, right?
Yeah.
You assume everybody likes this way because everybody on your team now says, oh yeah, it's perfect. But the reality is every single one of you came from the same side of town or the same school
Yeah.
or the same general makeup of background, that kind of thing. And so it could really set you back. And honestly, I think you would lose in a battle with somebody who's competing against you who doesn't fall into that. So it's hard because we tend to, as just people, we tend to gravitate towards people who are very similar to us. Because like I said
Yeah.
before, that's where your comfort zone lies. But if you can recognize that, and not just that, but start to enjoy understanding people who have done things different than you, and don't worry about whether they're wrong or you're wrong. just understand where they're coming from, right? Seek to understand before being understood. And I think that'll really help with the affinity bias.
Absolutely. Seek to understand rather than to be understood, and enjoy that difference and take note of the difference. Because if you are listening closely, those that are listening to this, if you listen closely to what John was saying, we aren't just giving you what the bias is, but we want to give you tools to avoid this bias. And I love how you start off with being transparent and being honest of, hey, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen overnight. And so to avoid this bias, take daily notes of some of the similarities in your life that you're like, you know what, this is something I really don't want to change. But when engaging with people, is this something that I look for? Take notes of those different attributes and those different things that may cloud your judgment. And the article says that instead of looking for someone who would contribute as a cultural fit, look for someone who would contribute as a cultural add. Not somebody that fits in, but somebody that fits out, that can change and diversify our culture. All right. And so we've covered the first of the 12 cultural biases, or not cultural biases, unconscious bias, excuse me. The first unconscious bias is the affinity bias. And so moving on to the second unconscious bias is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the inclination to draw conclusions about a situation or person based on your personal desires, beliefs, and prejudices rather than unbiased merit. So, for instance, you go in for an interview, and in hiring, confirmation bias often plays a detrimental role at the very beginning of the process. When you first interview this candidate, you review their resume and you form an initial opinion of the candidate based on inconsequential attributes like their name, where they're from, and where they went to school, and so forth. This opinion can follow you into the interview process and consequently steer questions to confirm the initial option of the candidate. And so you draw conclusions about a person or the people that you are leading based on the presuppositions that you have about someone, just something as simple as their name. You don't know, you haven't looked into their credentials, whether they're qualified for the job or the position, but you're looking at a piece of paper. And so you would rather hire someone whose name is Samantha than someone's name who is Shaniqua, because of your confirmation bias. And we all have biases. Biases are they sound so silly and so simple, but it is the things that are so silly and simple that keep from progression. For instance, well, Lafayette, you're Black, you must love fried chicken. And so if I tell you that I love fried chicken, you confirm that bias that you already had about me. But if I come to you and I tell you, hey, man, I'm Black, but I don't enjoy watermelon. You're like, there's no way, because you're Black. All Black people love fried chicken. All Black people love watermelon. Or, you're Hispanic. You're a hard worker. Or you love Mexican food and burritos, or you're white, you have to be Republican. We have these confirmation biases that seem silly and simple. Or he's Chinese, they're really, really smart. And the reality is that has nothing to do with my ethnicity. It has to do with the hard work that I put in and the time that I've spent to achieve what I have. And so we have these confirmation biases. And I wanted to give those examples. I know they sound silly, but I really want us to see that these are some of the things that really hinder us in our world. When I began to think about that confirmation bias myself, even with the name thing, I've read articles that people are qualified. They have the same credentials. They got a bachelor's degree, a master's degree. They have the credentials. They have the accreditations, but they don't get a job simply because their name sounds a little different than someone else's. And so talk about the confirmation bias for us. That confirmation bias, John, that's that inclination to draw conclusions or make a decision about a person based upon your own personal desires. It has nothing to do with them, but because you have these personal prejudices and beliefs, you exclude them, or you stay away from a certain group of people because of the confirmation bias.
Yeah, this really harms your ability to listen, because it's like you think you're always correct,
Yeah,
and that you think that no matter what, your viewpoint is the right viewpoint. And furthermore, you'll start to sometimes people will listen and they'll start to assume that because one person is listed as this and someone else who's also listed as that has a maybe a bad viewpoint, then that whole group must be the same, right?
yeah,
For example, I'm a Christian, and there's been stories of Christians who've done very non-Christian things, and therefore when somebody says they're an atheist or just not a Christian, they'll group myself with the person who made the bad choice. And this
right.
goes into politics or anything else, right?
Yes.
So now I don't want to get too deep into it, but if people assume that if you have something that says that you're a conservative person, that means that you're not understanding now, or that you only think in one direction, or that if you're conservative, you must be a racist,
Right,
right?
right.
We had this conversation, and I'm like, and I
Mhm.
remember that hit me, like blindsided. I'm like, I'm sorry, um, because it's just somebody came up with that assumption, and then the narrative was created, and all it does is create a larger divide. It does nobody any good. It hurts you as a person, but it also hurts the groups who may have been been part of what we've just assumed based on prejudices, stereotypes, and so forth.
Yes.
So yeah, the biggest issue with this for me is that you no longer. It's like you basically don't have the ability to listen to someone else's perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one thing that uh, you'll notice with all of these biases, they're all will intertwine with each other. So they're all interwoven. Um, and so we talked about the affinity bias, the confirmation bias. That's the second one. The first one is affinity bias. Number two, confirmation bias. And now the third unconscious bias is attribution bias. Attribution bias is a phenomenon where you try to make sense of or judge a person's behavior based on prior observations and interactions you've had with that individual that make up your perception of them. So these are dealing with the workplace, like I said at the top. Um, it may seem harmless, but humans are quick to judge and falsely assume things about a person without knowing their full story. And that, for me, that's a challenge because we often use that term, the first impression is everything. Uh, that is something that we need to get rid of because we don't know what someone's going through. We don't know what may have happened to them that day. We don't know what phone call they may have had or gotten off the phone with before you met them. And so we have to be careful of that, making that bias based off of that observation or that initial observation or something that we see on this person's resume or even unexpected behavior that may be happening during the interview. Oh, this person is nervous. They must be trying to hide something. No, they may literally just may have a fear. They may not be a great interviewer, but they may well be a great fit for your organization. And that happens. People have their different nervousness, they have their different anxieties, people deal with different things, and so we have to be careful to go beyond the surface. And I know that's a lot easier said than done, but it takes the patience and it takes time to actually get to know someone, so we're not so quick to jump the gun just because of some attributes this person has shown me that is showing me that may not align with something that I may do or I do in this situation or do in front of a group of leaders, doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong. It doesn't mean that they're not necessarily a good fit. Talk about that attribution bias. Oh, I can't hear you, bro.
Sorry, I was muted. This can go bad both ways. So let's say someone's late for an interview, and you assume that they're just, somebody who's not accountable with their time. But the reality is there was a 4-car pileup, and there was no way to get around it. Right? They could have been and you dismissed them, and they could seriously been the missing piece, the missing puzzle piece to your team that could have taken you to the next level. Right? I'm not saying the reason this is hard is because on one hand, you're taught make a good first impression because we understand how important that can be. And you're also, and for good reason, taught to pay attention to things. And, we all see somebody as far as like when you are starting to have let's say you're relating to somebody within a discussion or you're meeting somebody for the first time. Yes, you pay attention to certain things and characteristics because you are always trying to decide, is this a good person or not, right? I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but what you have to be careful of is, let's say, for example, I remember meeting somebody for the first time, and then later on, I remember my family member said, "Oh yeah, she thinks you're very arrogant." And I thought, really? I always figured out, I felt relatively humble, right? Apparently, I was a little too arrogant, or she thought confidence and arrogance were the same thing. I don't know. But, and it took me a while, if I ever was able to break that down. And every time I got around the person, I felt like I needed to fix that without them knowing that I know, right? That kind of thing. And so, yes, the bad first impression is, when you get a bad first impression, maybe they're kind of cold to you the first time you meet them. But what you didn't know is they had a raging headache, right? And they're just trying to get home. And so you just have to understand and give people a little bit of grace, as we say in church, right? Give a little grace. But most of us just don't and say, well, and you just have to give that, well, maybe it was for something, there was a reason, right? And I'm not saying if something doesn't repeat itself, that's the other issue though. If something repeats, it's okay to, we see that people act a certain way, and you may or may not like that. So I'm not saying don't use your best judgment, but at the same time, understand that everybody goes through life, and some days are bad days. On the opposite side, though, you have to watch, because maybe you're looking for somebody who's a great interviewer, and then they're an amazing interviewer, and then they're the worst person on your team, right? And so it's like you really have to balance it out, and in my opinion, seek out characteristics in the person, values and things that matter more than just, did they seem cold that day or off that day, or do they look really good that day or not, sort of thing, right? Because we shouldn't treat everything like it's their first date, right? Because on your first date, you're basically making a real quick judgment of, do they look good, and do they sound good and smell good? If any of those are off, moving on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so,
absolutely. Absolutely. I love it. Basically, seek clarification, okay? When it comes to attribution bias, don't go so much off the first impression. I love how you said it. Give that person some grace. All that means is just be patient with them. Give them more than just a one strike and you're done.
Mm-hmm.
You're no good.
Give at least 3. No kidding.
Right. And so kind of slow down and pump the brakes on drawing conclusions about someone until you get clarification. And even if you think you've gotten clarity, clarify some more. It's better to over clarify and vert yourself to get an understanding rather to just make an assumption. And so moving on to the fourth unconscious bias, this is conformity bias. This is a really, really good one. Conformity bias is the tendency people have to act similar to the people around them, regardless of their own personal beliefs or idiosyncrasies, also known as peer pressure. And my, do we not see that in 2020? People, you don't know what they believe anymore because you thought you knew their standard. You thought you knew their belief. But when they got around pressure, whether it be from status pressure of if you don't conform to the culture, if you don't conform to the majority, then we are cutting you off from certain resources. We are cutting you off from certain groups. We are cutting you off from certain invitations. And this takes integrity. We talked a few weeks back about compromising leadership. That goes right into this. But who would have thought that that is a bias that unconsciously many of us play into? And especially in the context of the corporate America, because in corporate America, people are always trying to climb the ladder. And so, whatever I have to do to climb the ladder, whoever I have to step on, step over, I will do that to try to achieve what I think that I should get. But the reality is that if you have to conform your beliefs, if you have to conform who you are and bend and to succumb to peer pressure, that is not something that you really need. Even if that's something that you think you need or you want, you'll find out that you may get there, but you won't stay there long. And so, talk about a little bit about the conformity bias.
Yeah, so acting basically under peer pressure is a really good way to put it. It's funny; it's the thing that we teach our kids not to do, right? But then
Yes.
as adults, we end up being just as, if not more, guilty, right? You tell
Right.
your kids not to do it because you don't want them to get in trouble. Well, it's not simply just to not get in trouble, it's so you can be a self-thinker. It's so
Yeah.
you can look and not be lazy about understanding a situation and actually dive into it and look for real facts, real data, all those things, and form
Yeah.
your own opinion on it. I remember when I was in the fourth grade, I had a teacher who had put together this math assignment. It was a group. It was as a class, but we were doing it individually. Essentially, we had to come up with the sum of something, and I don't remember all the details, but I do remember going through this, and I was never the smartest math guy. But and what she did is she started tallying your answers. So she had one kid go, and she said, "All right, so what's the answer?" And he said 104. And I remember thinking, I thought it was 96. Okay. And then next person, oh, it's a 88. And another person's like, oh yeah, 88. Another person, 80. And then all of a sudden, everybody started answering the same answer, the whole
Yeah.
class. And I remember thinking, oh, I must be wrong. I could have sworn. I'm double checking. She hasn't gotten to me yet. I'm like, I'm still getting the same answer. You know what answer I gave? 88, right? And or whatever the common answer was. And I knew it. And then she said, all right, here's the correct answer. She wrote it down, and it was exactly what I knew I had just come up with. So I had the right answer the whole time.
Yeah.
But because everybody else in class, what happened was somebody who is very influential gave a wrong answer. Then the next person copied them because of they're probably just low self-image or just weren't uncertainty of themselves or didn't do the work.
Yeah.
Any of those work. And then the next person just kept following. And next thing you know, it gets to me. And I just am fourth grade, 9-year-old. My son's that same age right now.
Yeah.
I'm like, go with this one, and I would have been right the whole time. So and we do this all the time, right? In work, when you interview by committee, we tend to just whatever your boss says, we're like, yeah, I agree. When you go on projects and you try to get people's actual opinions of something, they want to just give you what you want to hear, things of that nature. It's really hard if you're the owner of something and people don't feel that they can be open to you. But we do it all the time. It's a
Yeah.
conformity bias. You see it in government, right? You see it everywhere. So church.
Oh yes. That domino effect. I love that example
Mm-hmm.
how you gave in class, because one person is doing it in a space of influence, and the next person does it, and it's just a domino. And
Mm-hmm.
so you had the right answer,
I was guilty,
but
man.
because 9 out of 10 people are like, "Hey, no, this is right," then it has to be right. No, not at all. Don't be afraid to be an anomaly. Don't be afraid to be a part of the minority that is in the least of these, because the reality is being right and standing out is not about fitting in, and it's not about that dangerous zone. You talked about the comfort zone, but it's about standing on your convictions and what you believe. So we talked about that fourth bias, the conformity bias. Moving on to the fifth bias is the halo effect. The halo effect. You think about a halo, you think about an angel, something that's above someone's head. That's exactly what this bias deals with. It is the tendency that people have to place another person on a pedestal after learning something impressive about them. And so, an example of that would be someone tells you, "Well, I graduated from Harvard. Here you are, you've graduated from Wright State University, and both of you have a bachelor's degree, and you have the same degree, you have the same credentials, but the person that's going to Wright State University, we're pushing their resume to the side. You can go ahead and put that in the shredder bin. And the person that has gone to Harvard University, we accept you with open arms. We haven't really done our background. We haven't done your research on you. We don't know you if you're a good judge of character. We don't know if you're a person of integrity. We don't know if you're a hard worker or what your motives are. But because we base you, base our opinions off of you based off of your exterior and what we think is popular and what we think is major and what we think is popular, we rather accept that person who's going to Harvard than that person that's going to Wright State. But what you did not know is they went to Harvard and graduated not because they wanted to go to a school of prestige, but because their parents forced them to go there. They barely made their way through Harvard, and they really don't even like what they do. While this person that graduated from Wright State is a hard worker, they're dedicated not to just the job, but they are dedicated to the work because that's a part of who they are, the fiber of their being, and they are a dedicated person. They are a person of integrity that will look out for you and the organization that you are running as if it is their own, but you just dismiss them because you are impressed with lights and not what's underneath the surface. You're looking at the surface level and you're not looking at what's underneath what really matters. Talk about that halo effect, that tendency that people have to place another person on a pedestal after learning something impressive about them.
Yeah, so I mean, there's nothing wrong with appreciating when somebody does something great, or hey, congrats for your graduating from Harvard.
Yeah.
But the fact is, you without actually knowing the person, you're almost putting them ahead of another person, or assuming that they're just better than somebody else, or even yourself because of one achievement,
Yeah.
right? For all you know is so and so's dad was a governor and got him into Harvard, and he just kind of floated on through, right, because of a big donation. I mean, I'm not saying that's very common. I'm just saying you don't know, right?
Yeah.
Versus somebody who went to a community college or a local state college, paid their way through, worked full time while going through, has been
Absolutely.
just killing themselves for 4.5 years, gets out and is hungry, right?
Yeah.
When I was first learning to hire for our company LMS, I was talking to somebody who owned a much larger company. My son plays lacrosse, and his son was on the team. And I saw that he was obviously doing very well for himself, so I decided to kind of come out of my comfort zone and go and talk to him and just ask questions. Started forming a relationship, and over time, I said, "Hey, I'm getting ready to hire. You got any, you have any advice on that?" And he said, "How do you go about that?" And one of the things he said, the sole thing he looks for, obviously you need sometimes you look for certain credentials depending on what it is, but he said the number one thing is hunger,
Yeah.
right? How hungry is that person? And when I say hungry, like how eager are they to go after it and keep learning and not stop learning? That's way different than where did you graduate from? It has
Right.
nothing to do with it,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
But the other could be true too, right? Somebody may assume that somebody's been handed something their whole life,
Absolutely.
only to find out that that wasn't the case, right? That they had no parents and so on and so forth. Just because on the outside they look like they have it together, or because somebody who looks like them they think typically has the perfect life, it's not necessarily the case. So it can go both ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's so good, bro. Have that understanding to go beyond the surface. And so I know there were 12 unconscious bias. I want to do one more because we are almost at an hour and we don't want to wear your patience out, you that will view this and listen to this. So we're going to cover one more unconscious bias of the 12, and we'll cover the next six throughout the throughout the month of September, rather. We will cover the rest of those bias. So I want to cover the last bias of the 12, the sixth bias, which is the horns effect. It is just the opposite of the halo effect. Okay, so the halo effect is the tendency that people have to place another person on a pedestal because they learned something impressive about them. We talked about the halo of the angel. This bias is called the horns effect, and I'll let you that are listening, that are viewing this, you do with that as you please. I won't go there. But the horns effect is the tendency people have to view another person negatively after learning something unpleasant or negative about them. That's hard. This is hard. This is rough. When I read this, I said, I'm not an expert at this. I am not nowhere near perfect because if I meet a person and I see all these negative things about you and all I see is negative, then consequently, I'm going to perceive you as a negative person. But the horns effect can cause us to weed out people based on a trait that is adverse to our preference or our team's preferences. This could be something as trivial as the candidate working with a company that you personally dislike, or a candidate displaying a particular quirk or mannerism during the interview. Such traits may alter our perception of this person entirely, even though it's a small factor that may not even be relevant. When we think about negative traits, automatically we go to something on a large scale. But this is just talking about something simple. I like that example of this person maybe works at a company that I don't give my business to. And so because you've come from McDonald's, I think McDonald's is trash, only like Chick-fil-A. And so you may have had that on your resume. And so I'm Xing you out because McChickens and McDoubles are disgusting. Give me Chick-fil-A, that's a more integral company. And so I X you out. And so I'm trying to make these examples as basic as possible to show us some of the idiosyncrasies that we have that are really just plain dumb sometimes. And we X people out because of certain mannerisms during the interview. The person may be blinking their eyes, or they may not give us complete eye contact, or they may be chewing gum. And, that's rude. Me personally, I wouldn't do that. That may annoy me, and probably interviewing one-on-one principals would tell you that's a really bad idea. But the reality is we still should try to get past these trivial things that gives us the horn effects that paints this person in our minds as such a negative person, because we can't get past these trivial things that this person may display that really, when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, they amount to nothing, or they're very trivial. Talk about that horns effect, bro, as we wrap this up.
Yeah, so you're basically assuming that people can't improve, right?
Yeah.
that there's no change involved. We've all gone to school with somebody. I was a relatively good kid in school as far as what people see and know. You know what I mean? But we all mess up. We've all gone to school with somebody who the school themselves and the society within school assumed is going to turn out to be a nobody, right? Because they got in trouble or whatever. The fact of the matter is, we didn't know how they grew up. Maybe there was a really hard life at home, and they were just trying to figure it out or just get through the next 4 years. I know people personally, right? I've had conversations over the last year with some people, and I remember one, he said, man, I was a real knucklehead in school. And I mean, I kind of remember that, but not really, but I get what he was saying. But now fast forward, self-employed, has a great family, provides wonderfully for his family, does nothing to, I mean, he's a good person, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the horns effect. I mean, what if we just wrote him off, right, as not being able to be better? But what if we did that to you and everybody else who's listening, right? Just as soon as you made a mistake, we said, okay, that's who this person is. I really wish in an interview, instead of showing up with a resume of credentials, we could show up with a resume of like values, work ethic, and forward goals and dreams. When I look at, when I do mentoring, I'm not getting too much of that. I never ask, right? Like I never ask for a resume. Let's put it that way. Now, I'm not saying that's not the same with LMS for credentials because they're IT things, but in a mentoring situation, I'm just trying to help somebody else, whether it's through business or whatever. I'm never like, send me your resume. It's the questions are always, what do you see yourself in 5 years? What's important to you? I just not, hey, where did you mess up biggest? I hate that question. So many interviews ask that, right? What's the biggest mistake you ever made? I'm like, why is that important, right? First of all, are they really going to get the honest answer there? But and so, like, what are you actually seeking? So just understand that I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, listener, or whoever else is out there. None of us are, and the fact that we would rank somebody's like perfection based on what we think is worse than others is kind of silly, right? And it's like, as a Christian, they say all sins are equal, basically. And so, but we still rank them as people. Like, oh, that one's still worse, So, anyways.
Absolutely. Instead of bringing your credentials, bring your values.
Mm-hmm.
And what you bring to the table of who you are on the inside, your morality and your integrity. And so we've covered 6 of these 12 unconscious biases, that being the affinity bias, the confirmation bias, the attribution bias, conformity bias, the halo effect, and the horns effect. That always just makes me laugh. The horns effect. And so we will cover the second half of those unconscious bias in the following weeks to come through the month of September. This is our series of diversity. Speaking of diversity, one way to continue to bring inclusion and different perspectives to your life is by picking up a book and reading. Any of you that have been listening any length of time to Unscripted Authentic Leadership, we are firm believers that leaders are readers. And so the first book that we want to bring attention for this Read of the Week is Under Our Skin, Benjamin Watson. John, talk about Under Our Skin.
Yeah, so the reason I recommended this book so much, Under Our Skin, is I follow Benjamin Watson on social media. I don't remember how I started. Probably said something like any of us do. They saw something they liked, they said, or it stretched them. That's my thing. If it stretches me, then I want to be around that person more often. But basically, to give the quick recap of this without getting into the details, following the 2014 incidents with Michael Brown, Darren Wilson, and Les talked about John Crawford, which was here in Beaver Creek, Ohio, in my town, which never really got a whole lot of attention. I was a little surprised, but he talks about it in his book. Ben Watson wrote a social media post that went very viral, and in the post, he basically, me recapping, he started talking about these points, but they were longer in his post, and he just said, look, he was trying to take all of his emotions and put them into one, he's trying to understand how his feelings, his emotions were going crazy. And so he's like, basically, since he writes, he's like, he wrote down his emotions, and they were like, I'm angry, and I'm frustrated, I'm fearful, embarrassed, sad, sympathetic, offended, confused, introspective, which was a very interesting area, hopeless, hopeful, and encouraged. So it was not, it's not a book about doom and gloom, but he takes his perspective. And if you've read anything that he writes or tweets or anything, he does very deep thinker on a lot of these topics. And he eventually took that same post, I think it was on a Twitter, and I'm sorry, I think it was like on a Facebook post, and he put it in his book, Under Our Skin, and it's an incredible read. Remember what I said before, seek to understand before being understood. It's important to get other people's perspectives, even more important if the person has not lived life just like you have.
Yes.
And to really start to understand, somebody else's viewpoint, so you can start to get a better and really narrow in what is true north for you. So,
Absolutely. Seeking to understand and getting that different perspective. Awesome suggestion for that read of the week. And so our second read of the week is going to be Tears We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson. Tears We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson. This is a challenging book, not just for those of the Caucasian ethnicity or background, but for all races. Similar to what John was just talking about, Under Our Skin, trying to get an understanding, trying to come to a place of understanding to where we can move forward and stop all of the division, stop the racism, stop the injustices, stop the inequalities, and move forward to a place to where we can all say that this is the land of free, of the home of the brave for everybody. One of the quotes that Michael Eric Dyson says in the book, he says, justice is what love sounds like when it speaks in public. Justice is what love sounds like when it speaks in public. And so we want you all to pick up those two reads, Under Our Skin by Benjamin Watson and Tears That We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson. I promise you, you may not agree with everything that you read in both of those books, but you will be challenged in your thinking, and you will be stretched to a place your mind will not be able to go back to the place of thinking where it was before. And it'll open up your mind to be not just empathetic, but sympathetic to those that are around you, as our goal and our aim is to mobilize and to improve the change and to diversify so we can live in a better world that God has called us to live in. Listen, this has been another successful week of Unscripted Authentic Leadership. We knew this would be a great topic, and we are excited. This is just week one of this series of September. We've got some more things coming in the coming months. You guys do not want to miss. I promise you, it's just going up from here. And so we want to thank our audience, thank our supporters that continue to support us. And as you've seen throughout the show, that bottom ticker half of your screen, please take time out to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Unscripted Authentic Leadership, and follow us on Facebook. Very easy to find. You'll see our logo there that you see on the top left-hand screen. We're under Unscripted Authentic Leadership. Also follow our Instagram page at Unscripted Leadership. John's handle is at John LeBrun with the number 3. And then my personal page is at Lafayette B. Lane. You can also stream and follow all of our major podcast platforms, or find our podcasts on all major platforms: Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Buzzsprout. When you stream these, don't just listen, but leave us a review. Leave us some ratings, leave us a review, share the podcast on any social media page, leave us a review, show us some love. We appreciate you taking out the time to even lend your ear to our podcast. And we know we are the blessed and you are the blessed because of it. Let's continue to build bridges, not walls. Remember, bridges connect, walls divide. This has been another successful leader episode of Unscripted Authentic Leadership. I am your host, Lafayette Lane, and my co-host, John LeBron. We are signing off. We pray you all have a blessed week and enjoy. Be the leader that God has called you to be. Remember, it's a time to lead and a time to seek to understand. God bless you.